So a lot of people have expressed interest in home recording studios, and in order to understand how to set up your own home recording studio and select the right equipment and know how to connect it all, you need to understand interfaces. So I thought I'd do a piece on interfaces since it's a key concept. So let's get into it. There are a couple of interfaces that are commonly used, and one of the most commonly used is MIDI. And MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. MIDI can be transmitted over 16 discrete channels. You can use those channels in any way that you want. There are lots of different types of information that you'll be transmitting over MIDI when you're communicating or driving instruments. You'll transmit notes. When you use a damper pedal, for instance, that information is transmitted. Unicorda pedals, sostenuto pedal, all of this information is communicated via MIDI. There might be other things too. You might have a volume control that you want to introduce. You might have timing information if you're trying to coordinate different types of instruments. Now, the MIDI cable itself, the physical cable and physical interface, involves a 180-degree 5-pin DIN connector. But standard applications use only 3 of those pins, which basically involve a ground and then a balanced pair of hot pins. And another interesting part of MIDI cables is that they are unidirectional. So if you want to send MIDI information to a device, then that's one cable. And if you want to get MIDI information from a device, that's another cable. A lot of devices also have a through jack. And so what that allows you to do is you can have things going into the device, things coming out of the device, and then you can have a through that allows you to daisy chain that device to another device. So we talked about the 180-degree 5-pin DIN connector. Let's take a look at it. So here it is. We can see that this is sort of a pair of MIDI cables. This is an in cable, an out cable. We see that they have 5 pins. Now, notice they're numbered in a bit of a peculiar way. 1 is on the one side and 3 is on the other side. It appears to be a bit of a kind of a mirror image, but in any case, so this would be 1 and that would be 3. And right in the center is 2. And then there's a 4 on the one side and the 5 on the other side. 2 is your ground. The one that's in the center is your ground. The 1 and the 3, which are at the 2 edges, are almost never used. 4 and 5 are your pair of hot signals, which are typically at plus 5 volts, and they have a tolerance of 10%. If you're running with a bit of a different resistance, and it depends on what you're doing, and this is much less common, you might use 3.3 volts, but most of the time you use plus 5 volts. Unless you're trying to design a MIDI device, you probably don't need to know a lot about that. The transmission is 31,250 bits per second. In looking at the transmission rate and thinking about USB 2.0 versus 3.0, USB 2.0 will facilitate more MIDI channels and more MIDI cables than you could ever want to use. So there's never a circumstance in which USB 2.0 will not be enough when it comes to MIDI transmission. Just something to think about. It's a very, very compact form of data, and also it creates very compact files. Now let's talk about, since we brought up the idea of the Universal Serial Bus, or USB, let's talk about it. So it's basically a powered serial bus, and the fact that it's powered is interesting to us from a recording perspective, and I'll show you why in a minute. But we more generally in recording use type A, type B, which is less common in other walks of life, but in recording it's pretty common, and micro. And then of course we use 2.0 and we use 3.0, but 2.0 is actually more common because for both audio and MIDI, just because of the amount of data that we're moving around, it's not often that we need more than 480 megabits per second. This is type A. So this is probably the USB connector that you're most used to. The next one is USB 3. Again, don't use that too much. We also don't use USB-C too much. This is a USB mini. You might see that here and there, but this is the interface that we most often use. This is kind of almost like a square sort of interface. And so typically you'll see the A on one end and B on the other end. And typically the B will be what you'll connect your keyboard to or whatever device you have, like an audio interface. This will be what you connect to your computer. So that's a pretty common scenario. Now let's talk about jacks and plugs and how we communicate audio. There are unbalanced audio connections. So RCA is an example. If you remember the red and white connectors that you used to connect your phonograph to, that's an example of RCA. It's unbalanced. There's a mini connector, and that's the small 8mm plug that you use for your miniature devices, or you used to use maybe for your iPod. And then there's a 1/4-inch jack, and an example of the 1/4-inch jack is something like this here. This is a 1/4-inch jack. Then there are balance connectors, and balance connectors eliminate noise in the line. The way they do that is kind of interesting. So a balance connector has 3 pins, or three lines that it's carrying, right? One of them is a ground, and then there's 2 copies of the same identical hot signal, except that what it does is it will send one of the signals 180 degrees out of phase with the other signal, right? What this does is that as the one signal is at its high and the other signal is at its lowest point, you've got a situation, you've got sort of a +1 and the other one is a -1. Let's say you have noise that's entering the line. The noise is going to enter the line in a physical location in that line, and it's going to produce a noise pattern such that part of the noise will be at a +1 and part of the noise will be at a -1. And if you remember from math, 1 minus 1 is 0. So once those 2 lines that are 180 degrees out of phase with each other get averaged together at the other end of the cable, any sort of emission or noise that was injected into the line is canceled out. So that's the advantage of using a balanced cable. They're not much more expensive at all than unbalanced cables, and that's the reason why you won't see me talking about using unbalanced cables in a recording studio, because you just don't do that. You don't use an RCA cable. You don't use a 1/4-inch unbalanced. You just don't do that. There are 2 types of common balanced cables. One of them is an XLR cable, which has 3 pins, and another one is a 1/4-inch tip ring sleeve, or we call it TRS. And then we'll also talk about snake cables, would help you to manage cables. So on the top right here, we have a balanced cable, which has a tip. This is the tip, this is the ring, this is the sleeve. On the bottom right, you'll see the unbalanced cable, which I'm telling you not to use. Just don't do it. Even if it says Monster on it and they have a wicked cool advertisement, don't buy it, don't use it. On the left, you see a number of female in the blue and male XLR cables. These are extremely commonly used for microphones. The reason they're used for microphones is different than the reason they're used for audio. The reason they're used for microphones is typically microphones require power. What they call is phantom power. It's a 48 volt power. The microphone I'm using here uses 48 volt power, right? And so what you have is you have a ground, you have a microphone audio signal, and you have a 48 volt power that's going to the microphone. The audio signal is coming from the microphone. That's where the 3 pins are used. But also, it's a very, very common way of carrying a balanced audio signal as well. The reason is because it clips securely, which is the same reason we use it for microphones. It clips securely, so it doesn't just, you're walking around on stage and you kick the cable, it doesn't just come out. So as an example, the connection that I have that goes from my audio device to my powered active studio reference monitor, I have a 1/4-inch tip ring sleeve that goes into my audio device, and then I have an XLR that goes into my active studio reference monitor. So it's very, very common for speakers to have a male XLR connector going into a speaker. So that is what you need to know about audio. And so now I will give you a quiz. Before we talk about the snake cable, I want you to look at this cable and ask yourself, is this a balanced cable or is this an unbalanced cable? And the way we determine that is by looking at the end of it. How many rings do you see there? I know, you already read the label that's on the package here. It says balanced snake, so that's the dead giveaway. But yes, it has tip ring sleeve, so you can see the 2 rings that are on the sleeve, and tip ring sleeve tells you that this is a balanced cable. So it's a balanced snake cable. It's for 8 channels. They're color coded, so the yellow goes to the yellow, the brown goes to the brown, etc. And this is how you would connect a mixing board to a patch bay. And yes, you want to connect your mixing board to a patch bay, because after you wire up your mixing board and then install all your furniture in place, there is no way you're going to want to crawl behind that and rewire it for every different recording application. You'll really want to do that in a patch bay. So in any case, this allows you to do that easily, and the snake cable allows you to manage your cables so that you don't have wires everywhere in your studio. It's just a good idea, and it's very convenient, and these are not very expensive at all. Hosa Technology is a great cable maker. You don't have to buy expensive monster cables. Most of that stuff is just marketing anyway. So let's review what we talked about today. We talked about MIDI interface, 16 channels, 5-pin DIN. Each one of them is one way. You got an in and an out and a through. We talked about USB interfaces, and we talked about USB cables. Most of you are probably familiar with USB cables. We covered what might be new territory for a lot of you, and that is balance cables. So a 1/4-inch balance cable is a little bit different maybe than the one you're used to using. Tip ring sleeve, TRS. You can tell because it's got the 2 rings on the end of it. And then there's the XLR, which has 3 pins, and it kind of snaps in place, and they can be used for microphones, and they can also be used for audio. They may have a 1/4-inch TRS at one end and an XLR at the other. Pay attention to whether you need a male or a female connector at either end, and then of course you can also use snake cables to help with cable management. So that's all I've got to talk about with respect to interfaces for home recording studios. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.